Certainly baseball is a big business, and the way it looks to a young ball player breaking in was explained by Waite Hoyt during a rain delay at Crosley Field on June 27, 1957, in a night game against the Giants.
But New Orleans fascinates me because it was a fascinating town, really. It's a town of great deal of tradition and adventure and romance and everything else that you can think of. And I like to think of the Southern League myself and playing in New Orleans. It was always a great date, and it always seemed to me. We trained there, the Yankees trained there for 3 years. And had a great time in New Orleans while we were there. And entertained very royally, and we saw a great deal of the city and a great deal of the New Orleans people, and they were very lovely people. And the tradition that dates way back, the old French and Creole tradition down there is really out of this world. I belong, as a matter of fact, it was from New Orleans that I was technically, now I insert that there, technically sold to the big league, because it happened in a very peculiar way. In 1919, why, I was traded by the New York Giants, the club that are right here, to the Rochester Club of the International League, and I did not report to the Rochester Club because of a salary disagreement with Rochester. So, I decided not to play professional baseball, and I took a position at that time pitching and working for the Baltimore Dry Docks, which was a shipyard in the Shipyard League, the baseball league, and pitched down there for a while for them, and then during the course of the summer was doing fairly well, and it was such a time, there's a lot of technicality involved here, and I don't know whether I can get it over to you, but it was such a time that the big leagues had had a fight with the minor leagues. And the big leagues did not recognize the reserve clause of the minor leagues. Now, if you had not signed a big league contract that year, if you had not put your name to a big league contract for 1919, although why you or had you not, or rather a minor league contract, if you had not put your name to a minor league contract, why the big leagues did not recognize you as being the property of the minor leagues, so or otherwise their reserve clause, so they felt free to sign you. Well, I had not signed with Rochester. I was playing for the Baltimore Dry Docks. Along about June of that year, or July, when Rochester realized that they were that I was not going to join the Rochester Club and absolutely refused not to, the Rochester Club swung a deal with New Orleans of the Southern Association. They traded me for a fellow named Al Nixon, who had been an outfielder with the Brooklyn Dodgers and who Brooklyn had shipped to New Orleans. It was sort of a phantom deal because I did not report to New Orleans and Nixon did not report to Rochester. Whereupon the Boston Red Sox sent a scout around to look me over and had me report to Washington and pitch batting practice. They liked what they saw and they asked me to come to Boston, which I did, and I signed a contract with the Boston Red Sox. After starting the first game for the Red Sox, which I won 2-1, won the game 2-1 in 12 innings over the Detroit Tigers. Imagine the amazement of Jules Heinemann, who owned the New Orleans club and who claimed me as his property, to discover that I had pitched a game for the Boston Red Sox and won it. Well, of course, that really set some market value on me in the eyes of Jules Heinemann, who was never a fellow to refuse a penny. So Jules immediately wired the National Commission that I was property of the New Orleans Pelicans and he wanted money from me. Whereupon the National Commission and the Boston Red Sox wired Jules Heinemann back to the effect that Hoyt had not signed a minor league contract, that he was a free agent, and that he was open for signing by the big leagues. In the meanwhile, while this exchange of wires, letters, and one thing or another is going on, I pitched another game and beat Cleveland. Now I've pitched 2 games and won them. So now the Heinemann, the owners of New Orleans, estimate of my value, market value, jumped a little more, so now he wanted more money. So there begins an exchange now of more telegrams and more letters, such and such. But still they couldn't get together, and the Red Sox still claimed me as their property, refusing to recognize the ownership of the New Orleans Pelicans of my contract. Meanwhile, I pitch another game. Now it's against the St. Louis Browns, and we beat the St. Louis Browns. So now we've won 3 games starting in the big league. So now there's the market value rises in Heineman's eyes a little more. Now comes the thing that you could almost incorporate in a melodrama. Ed Barrow, at that time, the manager of the Boston Red Sox, decided that after I had started and won 3 games in the minor league, in the big league, that I was worth the price, even though they were not obliged to pay Heineman a penny. But he thought best to calm the waters, the troubled waters, and they were willing to pay Heineman, the New Orleans owner, some money for my contract. Meanwhile, Heineman decides that it seems that the Red Sox had offered $5,000, and Heineman wanted $8,500. So Barrow decides that I was worth the $8,500. Almost simultaneously, the same day, almost the same hour, that Jules Heineman, the president of the New Orleans team, decided that he would not get $8,500, so he'd best take what he could get. So he went to the telegraph office in New Orleans and wired Barrow that he would accept $5,000 for me. Whereupon Barrow's got that wire, but simultaneously he had wired Heineman that he would pay the $8,500. Now, what do you think happened? One of those things like Audrey, or whatever that hurricane's name is down there, arose and blew all the telegraph wires down. It so happened that Heineman got his wire in, and the wire to Boston went off, all right, but the wire from Ed Barrow to Heineman in New Orleans was never delivered because all the wires blew down in New Orleans because of the hurricane, and Heineman did not get Barrow's wire. In those days, as soon as you got the wire of that type, you immediately wired the National Commission, and that would clinch the deal, you see. Well, as soon as Barrow got the Heineman's sanction on the $5,000 thing, that he would take $5,000, Barrow wired the National Commission, which meant Gary Herman here in Cincinnati, is that I think that time Gary Herman was president of the commission. But Heineman did not get Barrow's wire saying that he'd pay the $8,500 until the next day, so Heineman's wire to Gary Herman, and the president of the National Commission, didn't arrive for some 12 hours later, and Heineman lost about $3,500 in the deal. And there was a big hullabaloo about that, and they had to settle that thing, and Heineman lost $3,500 down in New Orleans because of an electric storm or a hurricane down there at that time. So that was a $3,500 hurricane for Heineman. When I got down there a couple of years later with the New York Yankees, I went up to Heineman and I said, "You owe me 10%. He said, "Why do I owe you 10% for?" I said, "You never paid a dime for me, Heineman. Never a nickel. And you collected $5,000. You never had to pay me a nickel to transportation, to report to your ball club, nor a nickel salary. And you just collected $5,000. Nixon didn't report to you anyway, and Nixon quit baseball, so you wouldn't have had him and you wouldn't have had me, but you got $5,000 out of me and you didn't do anything for it." Well, then he sat down with me and he cried the blues, explaining how he had lost the $3,500.